bit early, but that's all right. There's nothing wrong with being early. So our final discussion topic this afternoon, and I'd like to first welcome our national executive colleagues who have joined us for this session. Please make them welcome when they join our tables later on. Our final session topic is, should Knights be involved in politics? And so, as a perfect example of talk about politics, we get an expert who does it for a living. So, we've got Senator Matt O'Sullivan, who was sworn in as a Senator for Western Australia on July 2, 2019. WA has been home to 6 generations of Matt's family, and he and his wife are proud to be raising their 2 children south of Perth. Matt has worked right across Western Australia. He began his career as a tradesman, completing electronics and communications apprenticeship. While doing this, he volunteered with a youth service connected to his church. Community needs that he was exposed to as a volunteer inspired him to pursue a career change as a youth worker. Over the following 8 years, he worked extensively with high-risk youth and their families. These experiences informed his deep conviction that strong families, good government policy, and meaningful employment have a critical role to play in building successful communities. In 2008, Matt joined Andrew Forrest's Minderoo Foundation. There he was given the responsibility of leading Generation 1, a nation-building project that has seen tens of thousands of Indigenous people obtain work. Matt has been instrumental in leading reform across employment and social policy areas in Australia before entering Parliament, but now also as a Senator. As a member of the Australian Parliament, Matt is a Deputy Opposition Whip in the Senate, Chair of the Educational and Employment References Committee, and Deputy Chair of the Educational and Employment Legislation Committee. He is also on the Joint Statutory Human Rights Committee, Senators' Interest and Selection of Bills Standing Committees. He has previously served as Chair of the Joint Select Committee on Implementation of National Redress Scheme, as a member of the Senate Legislation Committee for Finance and Public Administration, and the Joint Committee for Public Accounts and Audit. In addition to all these committees, Matt has previously served on the Senate Elect Committee on the Aboriginal Flag and Joint Select Committee on Australia's Family Law System, a committee he moved to establish in the Senate. Matt is passionate about economic development and opportunity, employment services reform and early childhood education. He believes in being a voice for West Australians in Canberra, not a voice for Canberra and Western Australia, which I very much support. Thank you, Matt. Matt's very keen to listen and learn from the community that he operates in. Without further ado, can we please all make welcome our keynote speaker for this afternoon, Senator Matt.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. It's absolutely terrific to be here with such solid men. It's wonderful, and can I thank you all for the opportunity to be able to speak with you today. In the time that I've got with you, I'll share a little bit about my story and what drives me and what has motivated me to get into Parliament, and of course then you'll be able to judge for yourself whether Knights should be whether you should be engaged in the political sphere. I'd put to you straight up that yes, I think there's a need for good men and women to be positioning themselves to get involved, whether that's to run in Parliament and to be a member of Parliament like what I am doing, or just involved in the political system, if you like, to help shape and shift policy in this country. Because I believe that without us doing that, then we really run a risk of having our nation in many ways sort of taken from us. A nation that's very much built on a Judeo-Christian heritage, and the values of our nation are solid, and they've stood us well over hundreds of years, and there is a movement to try to undermine that. And I think there is a need for strong conservative men in particular to step up and to take that role. I'm very inspired by the theme of your conference. Matthew chapter 16 has been one of my favourite scriptures. I'm a Christian, go to church, my family and I, we go to church down in Myaree. Grew up in the church, mum and dad took me to Sunday school and then youth group after that, and as you heard in the introduction, for a short period actually worked in the church. I was thinking I was going to become a pastor, and so I started at Bible college and started to did some study, and I thought that was going to be what I was going to do. I did become a youth pastor, which is kind of like a junior pastor really. I was never fully ordained or credentialed, if you like, but I was certainly on that path. But I realised that, after doing that work, and I'll cover this in a moment, but I really wanted to get involved in I guess that policy level of government and really starting to shape things up. And I'll touch on that before. But this passage of scripture really does inspire me out of Matthew 16, and to me, obviously, as people of faith, it clearly speaks of our need to find our own revelation of Christ and to not just have it based on what others have said, like what Jesus was asking of the disciples. Who do you say that I am? Meaning, I don't want to just hear about what others say about me. What's your belief? What's your conviction? And as Christians, people of faith, that I think is the primary message that comes from there. But I think there's more as well. It's about an authenticity. I think what's lacking in politics, and dare I say more generally across society, is what is it? Do people actually know what they stand for? Because if you don't know what you stand for, then you can be easily moved around. And I'm sort of going back to my youth pastor days here and preaching a sermon, I suppose, but that even the changing of the name from Simon to Peter, Simon in the original Greek means, or Hebrew I think it was, means reed, like a weed, and it moves in the wind, whereas Peter means rock, which is solid, it's strong, there's strength to it. And I think in society there is and this is a message for whether you're a person of faith or not a person of faith. I think what we need is people that are principled, people that know and operate according to what they believe and follow that conviction. And I think there is more and more, we're seeing, particularly in the political circles, a populism, a positioning of going after what is popular rather than what is principled. And that is many politicians are making decisions based on what they think the populace wants rather than what is right and what is true and what is noble. And I don't want to get all political. Obviously, I'm a politician. I can't help it, I suppose. But when I look at if I give you an example there of a recent decision that the government has made, and it's around the voice to Parliament, the Prime Minister was provided with advice from the Solicitor General and from the Attorney General, no less, so another politician, said that you should take out this executive government element of the question that's going to be put to the Australian people, because it's inserting some risk within our constitution that the courts will be the ones that will be deciding, and the sovereignty of government could potentially be diminished. And the Prime Minister took that to his group of Indigenous referendum council, as it's called, and he engaged with them and asked them what they thought, and they all said, well, no, we have to keep all that in there. We have to keep the entirety of the question in the referendum, so that the voice will be able to provide advice to Parliament and to executive government which means all of government, right, which is at all levels across government. And rather than following a principled advice, which is very much from a sound legal position, he chose to follow what was popular among the so-called Indigenous elites. And I think it's an example of where society sort of is shifting away from following principled positions and doing what is necessary and right, and just going after what might seem to be popular at the time. Now, so that scripture is one that has stuck with me ever since I first learnt it, and I've tried to live out as best as I possibly can a principled life and follow ultimately the call that I believe is for me, and try to be true to that, and not just go along with an intellectual pathway, but to go along with a pathway that's deeply rooted in my values and what I believe is right for me, and indeed for me to live out through my life. So you got a brief description of my history there. I did start my work as an electronic technician. If you go into the city and you've ever been on a cat bus, when you press the button on the cat bus on the bus stop and it tells you when the bus is arriving, I installed all those systems and they're still working. Every time I go into the city, I press the button just to see if it's still going. And I remember sitting in the recording studio. It was my boss's wife that we recorded some 30 odd years ago. And it's still her voice today. I was actually in town just the other day, and every time I walk past, I just tap the little button in it. And that was back in 1996. And I did the apprenticeship because I got the job. It wasn't really something I was overly passionate about, but it was a job. And I left school not really knowing what I wanted to do. And through a friend, I got this job. And so within about 12 months of doing it, I realised it actually wasn't for me. But my father, being the good man that he is, said to me, "Son, you got to finish what you start." And so I completed the apprenticeship. And but as soon as I completed, literally on the day that I got my trade certificate, I moved on, because I'd been given an opportunity to work within my church as a youth worker. And because I was very passionate about working with young people, I realised that working behind an oscilloscope and a soldering iron wasn't for me. I really wanted to work with people and help improve the lives of disadvantaged people in particular. And after working in that field for about 7 or 8 years, I realised that I was constantly dealing often with families and generational issues with families, where there was the young person, then there was their parents, and then there was often grandparents. And the service I was working with at one point was literally providing social services support to 3 generations of people, unemployed, disadvantaged, in and out of prisons, big sort of challenges in their lives. And I wanted to be part of something that was more systemic. Rather than being in the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, I wanted to do something that actually built a fence at the top of the cliff, so to speak, to use that analogy. And so I got an opportunity to work with Andrew Forrest. He doesn't need much of an introduction here in Western Australia, but for those that are from over east, he's owner of Fortescue Metals Group, started that company, and is now one of the richest people in Australia. Well, they've got a philanthropic arm of Fortescue, of their business. It's called the Minderoo Foundation, and I was working there in doing some community development work up in the Kimberley, and it was just an amazing opportunity, because I still do have a very strong passion for Indigenous community and improving the lives of Aboriginal people. And what I wanted to do was to see programs that gave them a hand up rather than a hand out. And so we established an initiative up in the Kimberley that was helping people to get jobs. I worked with some mining companies down in the Pilbara, even arranged a flight to fly in directly in and out of the Pilbara to provide employment opportunities for men and women out of out of Fitzroy Crossing, and I was able to see the transformation that was occurring every time someone got a job. And we ended up taking that program and putting it all across Australia. In fact, in 29 different locations across Australia, where we created what we call VTEC, Vocational Training and Employment Centres. And VTECs work to train people for jobs that actually exist rather than training for training's sake. The government spends $8 billion. Now, billion used to be a big number before COVID. $8 billion on training and employment. And they have a retention rate after spending all that money. Only a quarter of people, just over a quarter of people that commenced into a job that have gone through this $8 billion program are still in that job 6 months later. So 3/4 have gone. The program that we're running, because we had a guaranteed job at the end of it, we designed the training course around the needs of the employer. We fed people into into the training courses, then into the jobs. We had a 75% retention rate because we comprehensively addressed the barriers that individuals had to employment, got them off drugs, got them stable accommodation, did whatever was required. And there were some that had minimal barriers to employment, and there were many that had significant and multiple barriers to employment. So we established that and sent it out across the country. One of the things that we used to do as a graduation prize, if you like, for everyone that went through the programs, we gave them a fishing rod. Now, some of these training courses run in the middle of the desert, but it wasn't necessarily anywhere to fish, but it was the metaphor. You give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, you teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. And I was able to see the transformation effect that this program was having on literally tens of thousands of lives across Australia. And in doing that, it inspired me because I was connected with government, and I was seeing the role that government was playing, and I wanted to be part of something that was actually making a difference. And I'll never forget going to one of these training courses. It was actually back in Fitzroy Crossing. Sort of done this full circle back after a couple of years. And this particular day, there was a family that was there to watch their father, his name was Bernard, graduate from this training program. The program went for about 12 weeks. And these kids had the crispest uniforms, cleanest uniforms you've ever seen. They were brand new. They'd taken a half hour out of school to watch this graduation. And just the smile on their faces was amazing, and it inspired me. The partner or the wife of the gentleman and the mother of the children were there, and again the smile on her face was just priceless. And I knew that there must be more to this story than just coming along watching a family member. Just the way that there's just something about their countenance. And I went up to him and spoke to him, congratulated Bernard. He's there holding his fishing rod and his kids, bright-eyed. And I said, "You must be so proud." They said, "More than you could know," she said to me. And he was a very quiet man. He didn't have much to say, but she said, Bernard and I sat down just before Christmas, and so this was about middle of the year, so 6 months earlier. She said that we were sitting around and we thought, and we said, Bernard, if you don't change your life, this could well be our last Christmas together. Not that they were going to separate, she was worried about his life. She was genuinely concerned about his life, that either the alcohol would take him or he'd end up taking his own life. That's how dire their situation was. And she said he'd been on training courses before, he'd been on programs before, but there was never anything at the end of it. But you came up here and you said that if you do this training course, we guarantee that there's a job for you at the end of it. You said if you turn up every day on time, you do what's required, you don't miss a day, there will be a job for you at the end of it. And here he is now with a job, earning $150,000 a year in a mining company, and our kids are going to school. We just bought a new car. You've got no idea the transformation that's occurred in our lives. And so through working with government and seeing that programs like that actually can make a difference, I thought, well, instead of wasting $8 billion a year doing training after training's sake and sort of throwing good money after bad that government does tend to do. Of course, there's very well-meaning programs, and the people that run them are, you know, amazing people, well-meaning programs, but we've got to do better. And so that's what really inspired me. So when I was asked to, you know, what is it that has motivated you to get into politics? It's, well, I can see how the role that government can play, but it has to get out of the way and not just deliver services that just wrap people up in programs and what they call sort of wraparound services, but it actually provides some scaffolding around people so that they're strong themselves, that when you take the scaffold away, they're able to stand strong, as opposed to the concept of just sort of wrapping them up in more counselling and more services. And all those things are important, but if they don't have an aim, if they don't have a goal, they don't have a purpose, then as soon as those wraparound services are taken away, the person crumbles and they can fall. And that's what we've seen time and time again in social services. And so I took the step of putting myself forward, got involved in the Liberal Party, and put myself forward, and after a number of goes at it didn't happen for my first time. I ran in 2016 for the seat of Perth. I was successful in being pre-selected, but wasn't successful at the election. It's essentially a Labor seat out in the eastern suburbs of Perth. But it catapulted me within the Liberal Party. People saw the merit and what I could bring forward, and when the opportunity came to get into the Senate, I was in a good position to be able to put myself forward. And so I've been doing that now for 4 years. It's coming up on the 1st of July, will be my 4-year anniversary in the Senate. I'll be up for election again at the next election. Remember me, I'm on the big white paper, so don't forget my... You can vote above the line, but if you want to look for me, I'm down below the line, somewhere hidden below. And it is an amazing honour, it is an amazing privilege to go there representing your state. Every time I drive up to Parliament House, and I'll be back there tomorrow, we've got the big thing, you know what I'm talking about if you've been there, but even just seeing the photo, the big flag on top of the building, the big grassy hill, and there's this big, I still get shivers go up my spine. And when I think about the opportunity and the pride, the honour and the responsibility that it is to serve our nation. Look, there's a lot that's going on right now in politics. Every time you open the paper, there's some new controversy or challenge that we're facing. Of course, cost of living is a major issue that Australians are facing right now, with rising costs, with interest rates going up. I spoke to someone just the other day in the southern suburbs of Perth. They're earning $115,000 a year, which I think is not a bad salary, but they're struggling to make ends meet. And she told me that she's a single mother, went through her budget. The only thing that she could see that she could cut was her Netflix subscription. So that was $20 a month or whatever it is. Like a mortgage, paying the bills, electricity, everything. So people are struggling. And I thought, gee, if someone even on $115,000 a year is struggling, then that's above the average salary. God help the rest of us. So there's obviously big challenges, big social challenges. There's a move by the government. They've committed. I asked the John Roscoe, no, escapes me. Sorry, the commissioner to look at the Sex Discrimination Act, and we've got the Religious Discrimination Act that is likely to come through probably at the late this year or early next year. That is I think an affront to particularly people of faith, particularly faith-based schools. It's saying that what's been proposed is that schools, faith-based schools, won't be able to select people and hire people on the basis of faith. They'll have to remove that, and then essentially the argument is that, well, why does a math teacher need to be a Catholic or be an Anglican or a Muslim or a Christian or whatever, to teach that subject? And so it's undermining the values and the ethos of the school community. These are the problems that we're facing, that we're up against, and I'm again feeling very privileged, very sometimes daunted by the task that's ahead of us to have to face up against some of the challenges that are before us. Because again, it might seem that popular opinion is against these things, but you've got to be true, and you've got to be principled. You've got to stick to what you believe, and so that's why I'm there. I don't know for how long. Maybe West Australians won't send me back there in 2 years' time. I don't know, or I could be there for a while. But all I know is that the opportunity I've been given, even just going back there next week, is to try and make a difference, and that's what I'm absolutely committed to doing. So I encourage you to be involved in politics. You don't have to be a member of a party to do that. I'd love you to join the Liberal Party, but that doesn't matter. Well, there's many ways that you can get involved, whether it's by getting on talkback radio, speaking up when you're hearing something, whether it's writing a letter to your local member of parliament. Letters really count, I've got to say. We get a lot of emails. I get huge amounts of emails, huge amounts of Facebook comments, but when someone sends me a letter and they've taken the time to write it out and sign it and post it in, I'll tell you, it just has a real impact. So those sort of things can really matter and really have an impact. So I encourage you to do that. Get behind your members of parliament. Encourage them too. No matter what colour they are, red, blue, green, doesn't matter. Encourage them. Let them know you're there and you're there for them, and that you thank them for the work that they do. It can be a thankless task sometimes. Don't just go to them when there's a problem. Maybe bring something that you're happy that they're doing too. But of course, when there is a need to stand up, stand up. Don't be timid. Encourage those around you to do the same, because it really can make a difference. I thank you again for your time today. I'm very happy to take any questions if there's time, and we'll go from there.
Thank you very much, Senator Matt Sullivan. Some great points that sort of stood out to me there was particularly, I'm sure many of us here would follow as well, is the living of your values and principles in your daily lives and your daily activities. Some of your projects talked about helping with barriers, particularly in stable accommodation, and working with a purpose. Some topics we've talked about today. You had the President of NSW present first up this morning as well. It's no fishing rod, but I've got a small token of our appreciation here for you. I can help you
Thank you very much.
So just for, we'll just take one quick question over here, and then I'll give a quick, sorry, Dan, yep. Just not for Mike.
Thank you, Senator Matt. Senator Matt, being a federal senator and having worked for the Minderoo Foundation that exists off of the profits of Fortescue Metals Group, you may be aware of the exclusive medal title win at the High Court of Australia of the Yindjibarndi people over FMG for large parts of the Pilbara, which now likely pays the Yindjibarndi people 0.5% of revenue FMG makes at mines such as Firetail, resulting in billions of dollars to now let the Yindjibarndi live off of the fat of the land, as it were, effectively as land owners, opening up large-scale self-determination opportunities such as infrastructure, scholarships, etc., effectively as their own government, rather than relying off of the private and public sector. This is a huge change in the life of Indigenous Australia. Could you comment on how you think this is going to go?
Look, I've seen the result through the High Court and the cases. I've never been involved in this at all. Even the time when I was at Minderoo, the work I was doing was quite separate to Fortescue. So I really can't comment directly on that case. Or I worked closely with Fortescue from an employment perspective and the opportunities that they provide. They've got over close to 20% of their workforce are Aboriginal, not just in the Pilbara, but even here in Perth. They're aiming to get more and more people on St George's Terrace not just out on they've got about a quarter of their workforce at the port in Port Hedland are Indigenous. And I know that they've had a big impact on and big investment in health services and other things in and around town that they're delivering as well. So look, I know that the mentality of Fortescue has always been to provide for economic opportunity and development. In terms of whether fair compensation has been paid to traditional owners or not, I have to leave it to others to make that determination. The courts have made their decision, and I think we have to respect that. But I can attest to the some of the other groups that they work with across the Pilbara, and the economic development opportunities, the businesses that have been created as a result of the investment. Just paying royalties is not the only way to provide economic development. There are ways to provide procurement opportunities for businesses Indigenous businesses to get a leg up in terms of getting access to the billions of dollars of economic opportunity that comes through the resource sector. So there are many ways. Lots of mining companies, lots of businesses, many do a tremendous amount of work and deliver a tremendous amount of good. Some are a bit tokenistic, I've got to say, and I saw that in my time when I was involved. Many will put up some nice artwork, which is wonderful for the artist. They'll put some nice artwork up in their head office. Some will paint their aeroplanes and their trucks, and that's great. What I've seen is that when a mining company provides an employment opportunity, they don't just change it for that individual. It has a ripple effect right through the community, and that's what I think the focus really needs to be.
Well, thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you.
Okay. For the benefit of our national colleagues who have just joined us, so what we've done all morning is a similar format. So we've had a keynote speaker to introduce a topic or a theme. And then we've got a facilitator, Paul Kelly, is going to come up, help facilitate some discussion on that. We're initially going to break up into some small groups and go. We've got 6 tables scattered around. For those, sorry? National guy, okay. Unfortunately, you get to go, but I'll just explain what we've been doing anyway, so you can take it back to your own states. We're going into small tables, discussing more intently on some questions. Table of 6 to 10 people, then we're coming back as a collective and sharing it collectively. We've then got a ballot form we're going to vote on our own personal views, which are then going to help guide us with policies and directions and things in future. So without further ado, I'll now invite the national guys to proceed to the meeting room, and I'll hand over to Paul Kelly.